Andy, thanks for coming.
A real pleasure.
Yeah. This is like a continuation from where we stopped last time. And you really left us in stitches last time.
Oh,
it was a great conversation. So
thank you.
That was really nice. And again, thanks for coming. Just a few things, kind of like noted them down so that I don't forget anything.
Yes.
I've been doing like lots and lots of walks around Harpenden.
Yes.
And the area that struck me so much is that research center.
Yes.
And you said you worked in that research center.
Yes.
Can you kindly tell us a little bit more about it? All I know, been going around, they've got fields and fields of crop.
Yes.
And if you could kindly tell us more about that. Thanks.
Well, Rothamsted Research Station used to be called Rothamsted Experimental Station.
That's the one.
Yeah. And now it's called Rothamsted Research.
Yeah.
If you go to the front of it, you'll see a huge stone. And that marked its 50th anniversary of being there. How did it come about? Well, very quickly to say that in times of, at that time, the countryside had what's called lords and ladies of the manor. So there is a Rothamsted Manor.
Indeed, that was going to come to be my next question to you. Indeed, yeah. Yes.
And that is where the family lived. So, the park, for example, Rothamsted Park, that all belonged to them, but Sir John Bennett Laws, who was a son of the Laws family, he bequeathed it, he donated it to the people of Harpenden. He was very well liked in that sense. So let's go a bit about this research. What captivated me about it is that people come from all around the world to work there. And they study there, doing their PhDs. Scientists from every country you can possibly think of. But of course, the important thing to remember is that they're there for crops. It's the oldest agricultural research station in the world. And how did it come into being? Well, John Bennett Laws, before he came that person, a Sir or Lord, he was sent off to university to study. But like quite a few people who go to university, they drop out. And he dropped out in the first year, went back home to the manor. And they were wealthy people. In those days, you had to be wealthy to go to university. And he started doing these chemistry experiments in the manor, and that his mother and father allowed him. So thank God there were no explosions, but it was an interesting thing. But of course, being rich, he wanted to make more money, and he developed this idea for producing fertilizer. He opened up a company in South London, and that started doing quite well. And then he transferred these experiments, so to speak, into cropland, and there you have the agricultural research station in the world. People come from China, Vietnam, Africa, Russia, Poland, all the countries you can possibly think of. And it was quite unique in that sense. One thing I ought to say is that the manor house itself was used as a decoding spy centre during the Second World War.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's the oldest agricultural research experiment in the world that still goes on there, and there's a special section called Broad Book, which is the wilderness experiment. There's different things there. What the final thing to say is, historically, that Charles Dickens, who was a famous English writer, he wrote Oliver Twist and many other stories. He was a journalist, and he came out to do a journalist story about allotments, which again Rothamsted was beginning to pioneer. Allotments is where individuals can grow their own crops, local people. Do you want to know how I ended up there?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't know
please, give us
whether
the
you
whole
just
story.
wanted the history of the place or just... Okay. Well, I believe that if God can't be there himself, he sends other people. And for that reason alone, I was working in a warehouse. I was living in Mile End with my mum and auntie. Like most East End people, we led humdrum life, did what I call poor to uneducational jobs like warehouse work, machine work, that sort of thing. And I'd missed the train. I was sleeping outside the last train, sleeping outside Brixton station, and all of a sudden I thought, well, there's not a hope of sleeping here, because the escalators are going up and up and up and making noise. So I got up, started walking about. There was a taxi, and I asked him if he could take me back to Mile End. I had the money to pay him. I wasn't earning much, but I had enough to get back. He said, yeah, sure. So hop in. So I hopped in, and I was a young boy, really. I was about nearly 18, and he said, what job do you do? I said, I'm a warehouse man. He said, do you like it? I said, no, it's very boring. So I do it because I can't find any other work. He said, what do you want to do with your life? Nobody had ever asked me that. It was like God himself coming down and asking me. So I said, I don't know. Well, he said, I'll tell you what. I left school like you. You left with no qualifications, I expect. Yes, I said. I didn't get anything. There wasn't any hope in my school getting much. Not with my family background anyway. So he said, I used to go a lot horse racing, and I started talking to the stable girls, and they said to me, why don't you go to evening classes and start studying? And that's what I did. So I did my O-levels, my A-levels, and now I'm in my second year of training to be a vet. So he inspired me. He said that night, go home and fill in the forms to go to college. And yes, that's what I did. And I got an application to go to Oakland's College. They said to me, you're going to have to work hard. You're going to be very different than everybody else here. They're all country boys. And I stuck it out. It was very hard. And applied for jobs. I got offered one job at growing plants, and the other was an interview at Rothamsted. And thank God I got that job, because I got the job, and in the first week a man came over and said to me, would you like have a day off work and do your O-levels? And I couldn't believe it. No one had ever asked me anything like that. So that's what started me off on that.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. And then from there,
Well, went on, I did my O-levels,
yeah,
regained my maths and English and chemistry and biology and all these sort of things. And then I did my A-levels, I did botany and zoology. I was working with the plants in the glasshouses. And from there I got transferred into the labs, went into work in biochemistry for Dr. Pierpoint, who was the PhD student for Sir Hans Krebs, who got the Nobel Prize for medicine. And eventually I got my degree. It took me 7 years, all that. And then I went to work in a school as a welfare officer, became a social worker. Then I left there. It's a very stressful job being a social worker. Doesn't have to be, but it is. But as I said to someone, having come from the East End, it's like trying to make a suit out of a ball of string, being a social worker. So then I came back to gardening.
yeah.
Happy times.
I guess, sorry, is it because being a social worker, you're actually dealing with issues, you're dealing with people? Is there where the stress comes from?
It's partly that. I think it's because you know what needs doing, but your hands are tied.
Okay.
And really the managers just mainly, they'd rather have, just as long as the forms get filled in,
Yeah.
and the signatures are made. It doesn't mean have to be an end product. It reminds me of the Arthur Conan Doyle story of Sherlock Holmes called the Red-Headed League, where these people were employed, all had red hair, and their job was to copy extracts out of the Encyclopedia Britannica every day.
What a job. Okay.
Yeah, and he appointed only red-haired people because that was what his son that had died had red hair, and it became, the story is called the Red-Headed League.
Wow.
But I enjoyed, most of the time, I enjoyed the front line, meeting the people, because I identified with them, coming, the problems that they had were problems that I was very familiar with in the East End.
Yeah. Wow. Talking about the life in the East End, obviously it's changed quite a lot.
Yeah.
It's totally different now. How does it compare with that time, your time, and now? Okay. Is it a lot better?
Yeah.
Or is it something still needs to be done?
Yeah. Okay.
That's
a very good question. An emotional question, if anything. One of the things that never leaves me is the child within inside. The child that didn't get heard. And unfortunately, although the buildings are different, Tower Hamlets, as it's now called, instead of Stepney, the borough of Stepney is what I knew it as. It's now become a bit posher, borough of Tower Hamlets. They have a 61% child poverty rate, which is the highest in the whole of England. When I go back, my street's not there anymore. The street I grew up with has been demolished. It's become part of the London Hospital. It's very sad in many ways because the people that I loved, the people that I grew up with, my family, the old people, the people I played with, they're not there anymore. They've either left or they've died. So it is very lonely when you come out the station. I try and remember some of the happy times, but it is difficult. The price of houses there is now, a 2-bedroom house in Stepney Green is £1.2 million. When we lived there, we lived in a very old 3-bedroomed house, just a little backyard, outside toilet, no heating other than a little coal fire, and no bathroom of course, just a little sink downstairs in the scullery to wash. But we kind of got used to that because that's all we ever knew. But the neighbourhood, the neighbours and the way they helped each other was something fantastic, and I would give it all again just to have a day just talking to those people and meeting them all again, because the love that we had for each other and the way we helped each other, it was nothing for people to knock on doors and see how we are, or we'd go round there and I could choose at 8 different houses. So if my mum wasn't well, somebody else would be looking after me as a kid. So there was a lot, and if we were short on food, we could go round and see somebody else. So it was, that way was fantastic.
Sorry to interject.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say during your time, the community cared for one another, neighbours looked out for one another?
Largely speaking.
And the children belonged to the community?
Yeah, largely speaking. It's like anywhere else, and I need to identify that in case someone thinks I'm getting a bit too sentimental. There is what's called a threshold. What I mean by that is that if somebody falls badly below that threshold, even the neighbours can't or won't look after them. There's a certain modicum. And by that I mean, years ago, people, if they literally for a long period they weren't able, say a mother had 6 children and their husband had died, and she had no relatives and everything, she'd end up in what's called the workhouse. The workhouse was a formidable place because as soon as she got in there, the mum was taken off and gone with other mums, and the children were moved away into a children's quarter, and she wouldn't see them. So, and the conditions were hard. The food was sparse, and if you heard of Charlie Chaplin, he was put in a workhouse with his brother Sidney, and his mum was, he never forgot that. You never forget those times. So my mum and my grandmother used to go to what's called the Board of Guardians for help, and they were made to feel ashamed to ask for help. It was disgraceful, and my mother, I get very upset when I remember all this because my grandmother was a wonderful person. While I'm here, and while I got a chance, for the first time on camera, all this, I just say, I don't know if people realise, but I need to say this because this needs to be verbalised and recorded. Do the viewers know that in 1936 there was a man called Sir Oswald Mosley, who was a member of the National Front, and he led marches through the East End. He tried to march up to Aldgate, but the local people, the Jews and the Dockers, formed a union and blocked it happening. You also he had meetings in Millwall, south of the river, and noticeably, I've got pictures at home to prove it, there were a lot of people there putting up swastikas, using the sign, the Nazi salute sign. So there's that bit of it. That needs to be said and documented. So that was a really kind of difficult time. And when my grandmother came over from Russia, she and the war broke out, there was what's called the Alien Registrations Act in 1902, which made it difficult for immigrants. People are not aware of this. There's a lot of talk about difficult conditions now, which is true, But this is a historic thing, and when the war broke out, my grandmother, who was an old woman by then, I've got a document at home with the photograph and the album to prove it. She had to go to a police station in Lehman Street in Aldgate. Had to be had her thumb printed there like a criminal. She had to have a photograph made, which was stamped, and regularly report to the police station to prove that she was still alive. This passport she had to carry about with her everywhere, and the police were entitled to stop her at any time. It wasn't just her, there was obviously a lot of people. How a woman like that could be a danger to society is ridiculous, but that allowed her to take shelter during the bombing. When the Germans were bombing, the East End was quite noticeably had a lot of bombs. Without that, she could have been in serious trouble. So I just want that recorded.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So such a sad story. It's really.
It is. When you think what a lovely person
It's
she
emotional.
was. She was a social worker for the street. She held counsel. She upstairs in her bedroom. If a woman had a problem, they'd come up and see her. And she was a very, very clever woman and very, very kind person.
It's really emotional. I just feel, just listening to you, I feel out there, it feels like I saw the way you narrated that piece of story. It's not even a story, this is real life. It's just so sad, so emotional.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean,
what humans do to one another is just unbelievable.
it's unbelievable. Yeah. Well, I think it's very, very true. If we're advancing into that story, it is a bit serious, but I will say it. I had a friend, and he was from Rwanda. He's an artist, and his mother was a midwife. So during I can only call it a genocide. I believe that more people in Rwanda died in 3 months more than at any period during the Holocaust, during that particular 3 month span. And his mother, and looking at those children there, 6 or 7 children, she had 6 or 7 children. They were taken to a school where some of the children attended, and they were lined up and put on their knees. And obviously people walking about with guns, and anything could have happened. It could have easily all been shot. So what happened was, it was really quite incredible. This is a story that I encourage people every day to speak up for themselves, to really speak up and to use your voice, because you have to. Well, she recognised one of the captors and said, I'm the midwife, I was the person, I think I was the person who delivered you, I know your mother. And he realised by talking to her and asking her name who she was. So the captor said, I will go and speak to the other captors, and they were released. They were released, and they were set free. And I find that quite emotional. But what was kind of sad and yet here come, I'll give you the sad bit and get that out of the way, because I owe this man justice. He came into our house and told his story. One day, his brother went to stay with his grandmother. A little boy who was only 6, and of course, his grandmother loved him, and so did this man. Unfortunately, the others, what I call the other side, got into the house, and they didn't take any prisoners and killed both of them.
Oh.
For a long time, the mother and her children were on the run, and they were when I go past the roads, the hedgerows, I see food or berries, and that's what they were living on basically. And then when they heard noise of vehicles, they dived into the bushes. All of them survived. He came over, went to the University of Luton. But here's the great story, the great ending, which makes me shiver when I think about it. He went back to Rwanda and actually met the people who killed his grandmother and his brother, and forgave him. He said he couldn't hold on to that pain. He didn't want it, and he forgave him. And I thought, that is an amazing thing to do.
Wow. That's going beyond the ordinary, the normal.
He's a very special one, but he's got a lightness about him now, which he didn't have before.
Mm.
Forgiveness is an incredible thing. It's one of the hardest things to do. I think, as I'm talking to you, I think of Nelson Mandela. He said, if I carry on carrying hate to someone, it's like drinking a cup of poison in front of my enemies. And the same thing.
Same thing. Absolutely. Same thing.
Yeah.
We need forgiveness. And this kind of, like, look around the world. People just killing one another. It's like, why? Why?
Yeah.
When you think about what Russia's doing, what China's doing, come on. We don't own this world.
Exactly.
We're all gonna die.
Yeah, we're all on it for a finite time.
Yeah.
That's very true. And it's an important thing, and that's what makes it special, that we need to talk about this and look at the human side of it.
Yeah. That's really huge work. I've got more stuff here, but that's so huge.
Excuse me cutting in.
No. It's just that I don't know about you. What you've just said is so touching. It's so emotional. Probably let's just take a break. What do you think?
Yeah.
Let's take a break. Yeah. Yeah, let's continue from where we stopped. Yeah, last time. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, do you want me to tell the story about my friend John Kling?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, we have a saying in the East End. We have plenty of sayings. Let's give you three. One of them is, every dog has its day. Tibbs, my friend, that was his nickname, used to say, half a loaf is better than none. And the third one is my grandmother, who I was talking about, may she rest in peace, Millie. She had a saying, if a person had no brains, that was, a man, this was, she said, if it had been born a woman, he'd be pregnant every 9 months.
That's a winner.
So we dedicate all this to my grandmother, Millie. So we'll begin with John Kling. Every dog has its day.
A lot of people might not know.
Oh yeah,
John
every
Kling.
dog has its day, meaning that even the humblest, even the humblest person can have a day which exceeds beyond their expectations and get their just reward. And to supplement that, I will tell a small story. There's a Jewish writer, I've forgotten his name, that bit I confess to. And he wrote a story about this very poor child. He grew up, his mother died, then sadly his stepmom didn't want him. Eventually he was wandering the streets and then ended up in the workhouse, and one thing and another. He had a terrible life, really. And eventually he died. And he went to heaven as an adult, young adult. And they have a sort of prosecuting angels and the defending angels. Prosecuting angels said, "We've got no case against this man." The defending angels said, "Very well." The judge said, "Okay, this man is purely innocent. Whatever's happened to him in his life, he never complained. Now, my friend," the judge said to him, "what is it you would like?" "Your Honour," he said, "I would like a soft, warm, buttered roll." And that pleased him. So we begin. And this is a bit like for John Cling. John Cling lived. There were many poor streets in Whitechapel, but he lived in the houses that I'd been in. He lived in the poorest, very small, Winthrop Street, near the back of Whitechapel Station. And I went there, and I'd never known that. I never went there first time. I was curious as a boy. Most children are. And there was a shop near to what was famously called Gardener's Corner in Aldgate, which sold army surplus clothes. So I went up these steps, they're quite high steps, and it was semi-lit in there, small but covered with jackets and trousers, and well, not a lot of room. And a man with a cherubic smile, red his cheeks, twinkly eyes, said hello to me from behind the counter. That turned out to be Steve, and he said hello. So I said hello, and I looked across to the right, and there was a man standing there. And the most noticeable thing about him that he was fairly well dressed, but he had a trilby helm. He said, so very quickly, Steve said to me, "Do you know who this is?" And I said, "No." So he said to the man, "Take your hat off." So he took his hat off like that. And Steve said to me, I was about 17, so I sort of gazed at this man. I thought, hello, they're going to play a trick on me here. Must be, because East End people are noted for making fun and having jokes and that sort of thing. So Steve said, "Look at him from the eyes upwards." So I did. He had an extended forehead that I noticed about, almost like space creatures. And I thought, is he a spaceman? If he is, I've always wanted to go on the moon, so this could be a start of a great adventure. And he had these twinkly blue eyes, very beautiful blue eyes. I said, "I don't know." "Who are you then?" He said, "This is John," Steve said. "Do you know who he's related to?" I said, No. He said, Steve grinned at me. He said, he's related to President Eisenhower of America. I laughed like I'm doing now. I mean, this is East End, the poorest area in London. Why would anybody be a relative of President Eisenhower and live here? It's like the Queen sitting outside Bloom's Salt Beef Bar selling bagels from a chair. It was crackers. It was unbelievable. So I just thought, well, they're having me on, or they're mentally deluded, one of the two. But I thought, people used to play jokes and tricks on each other. It's a way of entertainment, and I thought, being a young boy, they were trying something on me. Oh, we had a little talk, and then eventually the shop closed, and I got to know Steve in later times, and he used to send me across the road and said, here's the money, go and get a big bottle of lemonade. And I did, and pour it, and we drink it, and he said, Andy, it's like nectar of the gods.
Wow.
And it felt like it, because I didn't have hardly any money, so it felt like nectar of the gods. Anyway, that evening, that first time, I went back with John and we walked to Whitechapel. Now, we parted. I lived round the back of the London Hospital. We lived at the back of the Whitechapel station. And that was it. And then, of course, I went to see the Surplus store again. And it was an unusual place because they had sort of like clothes hanging outside, jackets and trousers, all to do with the war. And they even had a witch or two, you know, make-believe witch out there. It was all a bit strange, really. Anyway, one day I was walking with him and I said, John, are you really related to President Eisenhower? He said, yeah. So I said, well, have you got anything in writing about it? No. It's all word of mouth. Like my dad was a sailor. And he told me about his dad. His mum had died early and his dad put him in digs when he was a young boy, about 16. And because he was going off to sea again, he was a merchant seaman. So I said, would you like me to help you? Try and find out about it. Well, there's nothing more that I love doing than taking somebody who's unknown and giving them the just delights. It really makes me happy for that to happen. And I think it's because Chris Searle did that with me, with my poetry. He got my poems and he got it published, and I started to read my poetry around the East End of London. So I thought, what's the next step? And in those days, there were next steps like there are today. There's always a next step while you're living, that is, of course. you don't have many next steps if you're dead. I'll give you that as a little tip for anybody watching. So get all your next steps in while you can. Or even if you're shuffling along, whatever way, keep on the move. So I contacted the American Embassy, phoned them up, got through. There was none of this option 1, option 2, option 3, hold on and wait, you'll call number 58, hang on. Well, you don't want to hang on, you try and call back another day. I got through, told the man the story. I said, can you help? He said, yeah, well, I'll have to try and find something out for you. There was none of this, health and safety and, you got to complete this form, that one online and this. Nothing like that. It was plain. And he didn't ask me who I was. He didn't want to know, my date of birth or what I had, whether I had pickled herring for breakfast the day before, all this rubbish. 2 weeks later it came through the door.
Wow.
From the American Embassy. This is, dear Mr. Strowman, this is the address, the name of President Eisenhower's wife, Mammy Dowd Eisenhower. You need to write to so and so, so and so in America. So I did. I formulated the letter, and like a journalist, my brother had been a journalist, my Uncle Davy was well known for telephoning in stories to the Evening Standard, and he got me going on that one as well. And I went to the Whitechapel post office and posted that letter. Now, you listeners and watchers would think Whitechapel post office. Well, that had high significance for me, and since I got a chance, I better tell you why. Stephen Grant, who was another boy down our street, used to love playing games with people. And bear in mind, there was none of this of you couldn't go up to strangers and stuff like that. You don't know who they are. No, Whitechapel was very, very different. So we used to go round there about 4 o'clock or whatever, where people going to the post office, and he would pretend to be, this is roving report, we've got a question for you, sir, and then hand the pretend microphone to this man. Listen, we'd like to know, what do you think about the weather? Will it need to improve? And then one by one we got all these different comments. But the most famous one of the lot was Benjamin. So I better tell you this before I tell you the last bit about what happened, the happy ending with John Clink. And that is, there was a young man called Benjamin, and I was very fearful of him. He was known for aggression, so I kept my distance well up from him. And he threatened to come round my house one day because I didn't buy something from his stall in Petticoat Lane Market, so I avoided him like the plague as much as possible. He went into the post office. He was 17 years old, on his own, went in and held the post office up with a gun.
Whoa.
Now this is before guns and knives and all that. Guns were rarity and there was no talk of knives. Yes, while walking through Whitechapel, I had a gun put to my back, but it wasn't normal. It wasn't a normal thing for people to be doing. Not like now. It's got more like American now. It was a rarer thing for that to happen. Well, he did that, and East End people being East End people, and seeing he was a boy, a couple of people challenged him. Members of the public. This is members of the public. Yes, would you have been that brave person? Members of the public? Well, he decided to fire his gun. He did. And then what came out of it? Water. It was a water pistol. So these two men decided to floor him and grabbed him and pinned him to the floor and held him while one of the post office workers went and manufactured the chance for the opportunity of getting police help. So that was a special thing. And how did John Cling end up? Well, here's a happy story. I wrote to Mammy Eisenhower. She wrote back on embossed paper, yes, it is absolutely true. John Cling of Winthrop Street, 8 Winthrop Street, Whitechapel, is a relative of my late husband, President Dwight D. Eisenhower. I got the letter. I went up to the post office, not the post office, after the Benjamin incident, I tended to rarefy my occurrences and appearances at the post office. And I went there at the Army surplus store, handed John the letter, and the biggest grin and smile of your life you never saw until that day when he opened the letter, and he was very, very happy man indeed.
Wow. Good ending.
Good ending.
Absolutely good ending.
Well, I'm pleased to give a good ending, yeah, a very good ending there, and he deserved it because he was what I call a very humble man who never spoke great things about himself. He had a lovely smile, great laugh. He was clever. He worked for London Transport, and he was made fun of, I suppose, because he was that kind of nice person. And he was very good with his hands. I helped him do a bit of rewiring once. He went to live in Chadwell Heath, and that was the last I saw. Well, really, I just kept in contact now and again with him on the telephone. I've moved round here and I had another life. But he was a nice man, and he was a bit like a surrogate father to me. He tried to educate me in the straight and narrow and to keep to a pattern of life. And he was a nice man. Very nice.
Very good. Really pleasant ending.
Oh, well, I'm pleased.
Yeah, we've been on the roller coaster.
Yeah, been on a roller coaster. We've done some stuff. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That's
I
all
appreciate.
That's all right.
I'm sure we're gonna have a chat about great things still
to
hear.
Yeah. My job is to entertain, educate, and to make people feel that the East End has got something very special, but each of us has got special qualities. Please don't let any teacher, any parent rub those out from you. You've got them, and you might at times within your day or night think, look, am I really like that? Because you remember perhaps some of the teachers at school who did tell you bad things, that you were rubbish or you would never be anything. But I think it's important, like my brother Paul, for example, he left school with 3 GCSEs and became a journalist eventually, and he did a lot for helping other people in Bangladesh and many other places as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That's all
I
right.
cannot add any other comment. And it's already summarized everything. I haven't got anything to say that's going to top that.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I'm pleased to be able to record this, and
Yeah.
thank you. You're the only one in my life ever, and I'm 69 coming up to 70 in January, who's ever given me that opportunity to record and talk about these things. And that's that. I hope it can be used in a demonstrable way, perhaps to educate children, perhaps to educate adults, to be used as a testimony. And as I've been told by a few people, I'm very brave and honest. Well, I never think that. I'm just like the Ancient Mariner from Coleridge's poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. I've got these stories, and I've got plenty of them. Some of them are incredibly sad stories. Some of them are incredibly happy stories. But I hold on to them, and I greatly appreciate today the opportunity of telling the story. And if anybody wants to contact me at a future time, my email is andy.strowman, strowman1@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's all right.